about second breakfast.
Time for second breakfast.
Hello, welcome to another second breakfast. I am Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast. And on today's episode, I want to talk about an interesting genre of music, maybe. So if you have been keeping up with the show, as you should be, you'll know we just recently did an episode on a band called Sim, Silence Is Mine. And they are a band from Japan. Now, I've talked about this on other episodes as well. It seems like here in America, we are very concerned with genre tags. Everything needs to fit into a box. And that's why there's like such a heated debate around a band like Sleep Token. Because is it metal? It's not really metal, but people call it metal. And it's like, no, it's just a band with lots of different genres mixed into their sound. And when we did the episode on Sim, I made it very clear that I liked what they were mixing in. Danger did not. I'm a huge fan of 311, so when they go into reggae, dancehall, ska beats, and that kind of stuff, referring to Sim on their album, Play Dead, I liked it when they did those things. Danger, not so much, but as is well documented on the show, Danger doesn't like fun. And ska and dancehall is usually associated with fun. So anyway, I really like bands that do something unique. And in addition to blending lots of different sounds, Japan has another genre / category that I recently came across. Well, I say recently, it's been a few years now. That really took me down a rabbit hole when I first came across it. It might even be one of the oddest, if you want to call it a genre, it's almost in line with the quote-unquote Christian music tag, where it doesn't really, what it sounds like is secondary to the lyrical content. Where in this case, what I want to talk about today is the music style is secondary to the look of it. What I'm talking about is something that is referred to as Visual Kei. It is a specific visual look that a lot of bands from Japan have done over the years. Now, I first came across this with a band called Jaluka. It might have been my doom scrolling, or Danger might have sent it to me. I think I got it sent more than once, and then I in turn sent it to a lot of other people. But they were talking about this breakdown by this band, and they said it's the heaviest breakdown of all time, clickbait kind of stuff. And it was for the song Venom. I'm 90% sure it's Venom, because they had another song that also very similar around this time called Black, and they both have these massive breakdowns in the middle of their song. And what was cool about it was, yes, it was heavy, but it was also like metal, but also sort of dubstep in the breakdown section. Jaluka as a whole has this very, again, similar to Sim in the idea that it's a mix of things, but in Jaluka's case, it's much heavier. It's very much metal first, metalcore first, and then they mix in, some more cinematic, production, and then also real fast. Another thing about a lot of Japanese like J-rock music, it has this like fast, upbeat sound. Like if you've ever watched any anime shows, a lot of those intros has that J-rock sound. And so a lot of these Visual Kei bands, even if they are more metal, still have that sound. And speaking of which, there are Visual Kei bands that run the gambit of just about every form of music. But specifically, the rabbit hole I went down was very heavy metal. And I think that that was part of the thing that kind of fascinated me with this. So let me explain exactly what Visual Kei means. So again, I am very ignorant on this. It's just something that I discovered a few years ago that I find fascinating and I really, really enjoy. So just doing a couple of quick little searches and a couple little bit of information I got. Basically, Visual Kei is a subculture and category of Japanese musicians that have a strong focus on extravagant stage costumes, and it originated in the early 1980s. Um, let's see. The thing that I think I find so fascinating about it is because, again, Jaluka was the first one I heard, and they are extremely heavy. And then that introduced me to a band called Dexcore, which is also extremely heavy. I mean, they again, it's the kind of music I like, so it is heavy, but there's a lot of melody. There's clean singing and screaming. Even Jaluka even throws in some rap every now and again. But their visual representation, especially so like Jaluka and Dexcore, for example, those are all guys. They're all men. But you could be mistaken when you first look at them to think that some of them, if not all of them, were actually women. Because part of the Visual Kei vibe is almost like anime style, and because of the teased up hair and the real extravagant makeup, they almost look like the closest equivalent in American music would be like the 80s hair metal glam rock stuff. There's very little different aesthetically, in my opinion, from, say, Poison or, something like that versus something like this. Like, this is the modernized. Yes, it's glammy, but it's also very gothy too. A lot of times they wear a lot of almost like black, almost ball gowns and dark makeup. It is, again, maybe it's just the Western ignorance in me, but when I see it, it does present as feminine. Like, it's usually they're wearing like flowy dresses and gowns, and sometimes even the mannerisms and demeanor can be a little bit more feminine, which I think is just, again, I find it fascinating because then a lot of these bands are very heavy. And I'm going to give you a list of a few that I really, really like before I end this. But if you haven't seen what this looks like, it's very interesting. So there's a band called Bounce, and one of their members, Koji Dejima, sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing names, especially in Japanese. But he wrote that Visual Kei, he was in a band called Bounce. He wrote that Visual Kei is not a specific sound, but rather it revolves around the creation of a band's unique worldview and or stylistic beauty through visual expressions in the form of makeup and fashion. And it does say that it can technically be of any real genre, but it is usually associated with rock and metal and punk and more aggressive sounds, which I think is just, it adds to the, I don't want to say surrealism, but the uniqueness that these bands that are done up very pretty are also some of the heaviest ones in, J-rock and stuff like that. This says some of the best or the originators of this, again, kind of like in the 80s into the early 90s, were bands like X Japan, Dead End, Buck Tick, and Color. And then in the 90s, there were bands like Lunacy, Glay, and Melise Miser. Now, I'll be honest with you, these are not bands that I am very familiar with. But then in the early 2000s, there was a new metal band that got a little bit of notoriety here in America. They did some tours with Korn and some other bands called Dir in Grey. And that was probably my first exposure to it, but I didn't know what it was because this would have been like when I was still in high school, and they had a video oh gosh, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but they actually kind of got in trouble for this video. I think it might have been called like Obscura or something like that. You can find it on YouTube if you, or online if you click around enough to find like the uncensored version. But again, I haven't seen it in years, but I remember when it came out, it was like, this is terrifying. And in their case, at least at that time, and I'm not super familiar with them either, their Visual Kei style was not quite as, I hate to use the word feminine because I don't know that that's really what they're going for. It just sort of ends up being that way, I guess, in my ignorant Western brain. And maybe over there, and look, I don't want to get into like gender stuff and all that. That's none of my business. I'm just saying that like here in America, when you see men dressed that way, presenting that way, we would consider that like feminine. But I don't know that that's really what they're going for here. I think it's more based on just fashion. And and even stuff like K-pop, where the guys are, I don't want to say always, but sometimes there's a bit of like androgyny to the way they present themselves, and there's almost a little bit of that here with this Visual Kei stuff. But here's the kicker though. They may show up wearing like a ball gown and heels and crazy mascara and makeup, and then they shred their asses off and play some of the coolest, most interesting metal that I have heard in years. I already mentioned Jaluka. They are the first one that I saw, and I really, really got into them. I even follow a couple of their members on social media. I know Boogie is the bass player, and then, oh gosh, the guitar player, name escapes me at the moment, but phenomenal guitar player, and does some rap vocals on some of the songs. Very cool. They're one of those bands that I would really, really like to see live. Everything I've seen of them performing live looks like a ton of fun. But again, Japan, they're probably not coming around here anytime soon. Actually, I take that back. They have done some United States tours, and I think they might even be, at time of recording this, on tour, but not coming around here, or couldn't. I can't remember. I looked at the tour dates, and there was some reason I wasn't going to be able to figure it out. But Jaluka is great. If you like the more extreme side of things, I think Jaluka is very interesting because they do a lot of blast beats. They do a lot of really cool breakdowns with like weird time signatures and stuff. And as soon as I saw it and heard it, I was like, I need more of this in my life. So I started kind of going down the rabbit hole. And the next band I came across was Dexcore, and I already brought them up. They are not dissimilar to Jaluka in the sense that they're predominantly very heavy and very like metalcore. Again, all these bands that I'm going to list 3 or 4 more. They all mix a lot of different stuff, but they all have that same aesthetic. And like I said, if this sounds like crazy weird to you, if you've never seen this or heard this, it might sound very weird. It was a little weird at first for me until it just like clicks and you're like, I get it. Like, I don't quite understand why, but I get it and I dig it. But then musically, Jaluka and Dexcore specifically are, I would say Dexcore is not as extreme as Jaluka, but similar in the sense that it is mostly metal and metalcore. Another band I came across is Zera, Zera. You kind of have to search some of these bands uniquely because, especially Zera, like, I can't tell you the name of the song that I discovered them on because it's just in Japanese. So a lot of times these bands, you almost have to search like Zera Visual Kei Band or something like that. Because their name is really just like like Japanese symbols, and I don't know exactly how that translates or what Zera means. But so in Zera's case, yes, same thing. They're mixing metal and all this stuff, but they're a little bit more like rock, and they have a little bit more of a punk attitude, I would say, than Dexcore or Jaluka, but very similar in the presentation. And what's interesting about them is in their music videos, they never have a drummer. When I've seen live performances and they have a drummer, but in the actual videos, it's two guitar players, bass player, and singer. And hey, but very cool. If this is a little bit more, like I said, I hesitate to call it glam, but it's a little bit more theatrical. For as theatrical as all these bands look, their music also is a little bit more theatrical. Then there's another one called Nameless. That's also a hard band to look up. If you put Nameless Visual Kei, it usually comes up. But they have they've gone through a couple different iterations, and at one point they had a second guitar player, and they were doing some little bit more intricate kind of guitar stuff, and I really liked them. More similar to Jaluka and Dexcore, that it's a little bit more metalcore and not quite as glammy, but really, really cool. There's another one called Damned, and what's unique about them is similar to the sounds of these other bands, metal, a little bit extreme, little bit of some other stuff. They have a very gothic presentation to their Visual Kei style. It's still very much in the same vein of these like big elaborate costumes and the very aggressive makeup, but it's also it's a lot darker. And like with Jaluka specifically, they have almost this cyberpunk aesthetic mixed in with this. This feels more like Victorian goth kind of mixed in with their look. And then sound-wise, yeah, they're very heavy as well. Already mentioned Duran Gray. They're sort of more nu metal. And I didn't, like I said, it's been years since I've really listened to them. They don't quite have as extreme visual that I remember. There's another one called Deviloof that I had a hard time getting into them. They are also extremely heavy, but they have a couple songs that I like. And then one more that I'm going to mention, because all the bands that I just mentioned, as far as I know, every member of those bands is male. And they all have this aesthetic that I'm talking about, with the real aggressive makeup, a lot of flowy clothing. Again, as Westerners, we would say that they look very feminine. They're, presented that way. But there's a really cool band called STMLT. And they are considered Visual Kei as well, but they're actually an all-girl band. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think they're all really young too. They look very young, but they're really good. They have more of like a Linkin Park, rap rock, nu metal kind of sound. Very catchy, very cool. And if they are young, then if they're as young as I think they are, then I think they have a pretty bright future ahead of them. So that's just a quick little list of a handful of Visual Kei bands that I've discovered. There are tons and tons more. And just like everything else, there's all kinds of different styles. And again, if I have said anything that's like, ignorant or whatever, please correct me. Because, this is a relatively new thing that I've, just over the past couple of years have gotten into. I don't know the history of it. I don't really know how it originated, other than what I said a few minutes ago. But I find it fascinating. And I also found it really interesting, like I said, the Christian music comparison, where Visual Kei, you immediately know what that looks like, but you don't know what it sounds like. Just like when somebody says, this is Christian rock. You don't know if you're going to get Pillar, POD, Zao, Living Sacrifice, or you're going to get Jeremy Camp. Like, it's just this huge, broad spectrum, and I found that correlation to be very interesting. But have you ever heard of any of these bands? Have you ever heard of Visual Kei in general? I'd love to know your thoughts. Is there a band that is Visual Kei that I am missing that is fantastic that I need to check out? Please let me know. And if not, hey, maybe you learned something today about some cool Japanese rock bands you can go check out. And yeah, I hope you have a great day.